so Donald, I'll make small talk for 20 seconds. So have you read every book on the shelf?
There's a phrase that Umberto Eco used. He said he hadn't read every book, but he'd read in them.
Uh-huh.
I've read in all my books, not cover to cover, but I know them all pretty well.
Wow, that's amazing. That really is a library.
Oh, it's a
You
small
could
part of it.
oh wow. Maybe one time we'll have to do a video tour
Yeah,
of
exactly. Yeah,
or do you need a drone to
uh, pretty much. Yeah, yeah. It's good. Yeah, every room has at least this number of books in it. And more.
wow. Wow. That's that's an incredible feat on its own. All right, so let's get rolling. So to Donald Farmer, thanks so much for being with us. I'm real excited to have this chance to speak with you, but more excited to introduce you to our audience.
Thank
And
you.
for the folks coming in, just a couple of quick notes. One, if you have any questions, please put them in the question section that's below the window. We're not going to do Q&A today, but if we see anything in there, Donald and I will do our best to answer those questions afterwards, and we'll let you know the link where you can see that. Also, this is being recorded, so we'll also send you a link there, which of course you can absolutely share with your friends and colleagues. So we definitely want to make the best use of our time, and we're going to jump right into it. So Donald, though, I do have one quick thing I want to get an update on. You were letting me know that you had, it sounded like a bit of an unwanted guest in your think tank treehouse. So I just wanted to get a quick update on if you have recaptured that territory or.
No, no, no. So our tree house is kind of beautiful, and of course, it's in the garden. And very recently, a feral cat turned up and decided that it wanted to live in the tree house, and we haven't evicted it yet. It still hangs out there, and I don't think I'm afraid of it, but yeah, it's definitely a wild cat. But we've been giving it a little food and kind of keeping it comfortable because it's a dangerous place out here with coyotes and bears and bobcats and mountain lions and things. So we want to keep it safe, but it does mean we've been evicted from the treehouse for the summer at least.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's definitely a story. We only get things like deers and squirrels and the occasional bear in our neighborhood, which sounds kind of surprising, but hopefully you can get back into it soon.
Looking forward to it.
So let's. So you've worked obviously with a lot of customers in a lot of different ways, and that's around understanding how business intelligence and analytics fits not only into their strategy, but their day-to-day work, maybe even their work culture. And I imagine that there's times when you're at a customer and it just occurs to you that you see something that happens pretty often and you say to them, look, I'm seeing something going on here. And I think if you make this one small change, it's something you could do pretty quickly that would really make a big difference. So is there something you could just share with us that you think is one of those ideas that people could take away and start working on implementing for themselves?
That's a great question. The one thing I nearly always end up recommending to every client I speak with is use data consistently in your conversations and in your communications. And what I mean by that is a lot of us have aspirations to be data driven is a very common phrase, and we want to be a data driven business, want to be data informed. Then be data informed. Start by doing it. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to have the greatest visualizations. In fact, it's even better if you just start where you are and start having the conversations that you need to have, but informed by data. And a number of times, one of the things I often do with customers is actually I ask them if I can sit in their meetings, maybe a weekly sales meeting, maybe a monthly review, maybe a quarterly business and strategy meeting. And I just observe them. I don't take part in the meeting. I just observe and take notes of what they're doing. And I take notes about how they use data in those meetings. And honestly, very often they don't. even companies that are technology companies that are building data-driven products are not using data extensively. So the number one thing I recommend to people is actually, if you want to be data-driven, start being data-driven. Start using data and start communicating with it. You're sending out that memo to your team. Where's the data? You're making this product proposal. Where's the data? You're complaining about these sales numbers. Well, where's the data, and where's the link to the data that people can dig in and do their own experimentation with? So it really comes down to kind of living living consistently with your own vision of what it is you want to be, and that's the number one thing I recommend to people.
So it's not even anything. I don't want to call it advanced. It's just more.
It's very basic.
Very basic, right? You're just saying use data in some of the very day-to-day kinds of things that you're doing, and it's glaringly missing. So so what is it? What you expect to see? Is it more verbal, meaning things that they're just writing down numbers? Is it that they should be using visualizations? Should it be that whatever they're trying to, if they're trying to develop some kind of application, that they're using some reflection of that?
That's a good point. So let me be clear that by using data, what I mean is not just giving numbers. Giving numbers without telling people how those numbers were derived, and without giving people the opportunity to investigate those numbers isn't really using data. It might be using the findings from data, but ultimately it's not really using the data itself. So, for example, let's take a simple example we'd all be familiar with. You get your phone bill. Now, I remember getting my phone bill from companies back in the 90s, for example, and you would get a number. You would get a number that would say, this is your monthly phone bill. And there was no data behind it. It was just a number, and you either agreed with it or you didn't. And then we started to get itemized bills. And now you could actually dig in and understand that number and indeed question it if necessary. And then I see that with my other utility bills. My utility bills now include much more breakdowns, and they include patterns and trends. This is how you compare to previous month and previous years. And even in some cases, this is how you compare to your neighborhood and to similar people. That's data. Just giving a number and saying this is your bill, that's not data. So the same way, think of it in business context. If I'm discussing sales numbers, it's one thing to say, well, these are our sales numbers, they're good and bad, and that's typically the kind of message that we get. Rather than just giving that, well, here's a link to the dashboard. Here's the link to the data feed where you can download and see, and maybe you'll have other opinions that can then be investigated and raised. And that's living with data, not just living with the results of data analysis, but actually enabling people to do that. And it is a very basic thing. And sometimes people want a technological solution. They believe that there's some sort of technological deus ex machina that will come down and solve their analytic problems for them. Or, oh yeah, we'll do that once we've built our data warehouse, or once we've built our dashboards, or once we've deployed this new tool that will solve all these problems. My answer to them is always start where you are. Don't put it off until you've built the perfect solution. Start with the conversations. And as you do that, you will actually greatly improve the final result of what you're doing, because people will become more data aware, people will become more fluent in the use of data and more fluent in having those conversations. Mark Webber, who founded Fast Company magazine, said back in the 90s that in the information economy, conversations are the most important form of work. And maybe a slight exaggeration, and he doesn't just mean hanging around a water cooler either, but he does, which we don't do anymore. But he meant in particular, I think, that in the information economy, all your competitors have the information too. The data is available. Everybody should have more data than they know what to do with. What really changes and what really makes the difference between one company and another is the conversations they have around that data. Yeah. That's what's important. So start having those conversations, but with data, not just with abstracted, high-level, aggregated numbers.
So what is it, just to kind of close this question out, what is it that you think is the reason why they haven't done that? Is it business as usual? Is it, gee, I never thought about it? Or is it some kind of
Well,
other
very
cultural
often,
thing you're seeing?
very often it's putting off what I said about waiting for the technological solution.
Mm,
And so we'll do that when we have the technology. We'll do
yeah,
that after we've, gone through this RFP process, chosen a tool, deployed it, and trained everybody in it. Then we'll be able to have those data conversations. No, you can start. You can start right away doing it. So very often it's that. It's the believing that you're not in a position to have those conversations gets in the way of it. When in fact, you
yeah.
can have them at a very basic level and build up gradually. Gradualism and the implementation piece by piece of ever improving excellence is really the way to develop rather than waiting, as I say, for some perfect solution to come along.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing that point up because I do think in historically in our line of work, there's this idea of perfect and final. Oh, I'll have all the data or whatever you want to add at the end of the sentence. And it's not a reality. I mean, you can always have more data, you can always be faster, you can whatever it is, right? So it really never ends, although a project may end or a part
Yeah.
of a project, right? But so I think that idea gets in the way. And I use that with my customers as well when we're say building out a story, right? Is it like the typical thing is, well, let's figure out what the whole story is, right? Which means building out some set of visuals, dashboards, whatever you want to call them. And I'm like, no, let's build chapter one. So
Right.
when you start, right, let's and start using it, just kind of like you're saying, start learning from it because maybe you'll write a different chapter too. So before we try to write a whole book, let's get your hands dirty and get into what we do have available, even if not all the data is available, or even if it is, we just don't want to spend the time. We want to get moving. And so I think it's a really good reflection for people to consider that how do I get started in some way? Just get moving and not get held back by this. What is it? It's like something like perfection is the enemy of done or something of that
Oh, that's
nature.
right. Yeah, the perfect is the
That,
enemy of the good, or something like that. Yeah.
yeah, that phrase, and I think it that always resonates with me. It's like, yeah, you could always improve it, but let's get started. All right. So speaking of kind of that being comfortable with that idea, I want to kind of even tap right into that. So a lot of what we're seeing over, I would say, certainly the last 5 to 10 years has been an incredible uh, growth in analytics around software. Huge improvements, not just in the user experience, but in the capabilities, in the technology. But I've really felt that and that's going to continue, right? We're always getting better. That for companies to really make the best use of that and take the next big jump in how data and analytics really helps those companies is going to really be more about people changing their behavior about how they use the data and how they're using making decisions in the organization.
For sure.
But the trick is that cultural change in general is hard. Cultural change is incredibly difficult in general, but I think also, especially when you're getting into more of the technology type people. So, having said all that, can you think about a time when you were personally faced, kind of at work? I mean, it could be even personal, really personal, where you had to push yourself past a comfort zone in something that you were really kind of steadfast in. And what was that, and why was it so hard for you to do that?
I can think of several examples, and cultural change is super difficult, and comfort zones are also difficult to break out of. And one of the reasons for that, one is we may have a real resistance. Our comfort zone is comfortable, so we may have a real resistance for that, and we don't see the opportunities in getting outside of that comfort zone. And the other thing is, of course, we may actually be afraid. And when I say afraid, I mean, well, sometimes it may be a genuine fear, and other times it
Mhm.
may be just this sort of sense that we're not up to it, that we're not capable of doing this. And I'll give you a very good example of this. When I worked at Microsoft, I was leading the product management team for the program management team for um, a very interesting product that was it was Power Pivot, which became then the later became Power BI, but it was an extension to Excel that enabled very large amounts of data to be analyzed within the Excel environment. And I was leading the client side of that, the design and program management of the client side. And one of the things that really kind of fell to my responsibility was taking part in the bug meetings, taking part in the shipping reviews, taking part in the what I would think of as the bureaucracy of shipping a product. And I found it, I have to say, in a sense, I found it very boring. But I also realized that one of the reasons I found it boring was because I actually thought I wasn't very good at it. I didn't have the attention to detail. I didn't have the methodological approach to it. And I probably always worried a little bit that I would be tripped up by not knowing something. Somebody would ask me a question about our test results and I wouldn't know, or somebody would ask me a question about the progress towards a certain goal, and I wouldn't be on top of that information. And I sat in these meetings, and these meetings were often quite intense and quite high level and very detail oriented. And I'm really not a very detail oriented person. And my manager, I had a great manager, Kamal Hadi, and he said, "You'll go along and do this. It's part of your job, and you can do it." And so I did. And I didn't enjoy it. I hated it, but I stuck at it, and I found two things that actually worked, and one of them was, rather than being caught out and put on the spot in the meeting and having to face these highly technical, highly detail-oriented people who are asking me very, very focused questions. If I knew I had a problem, I actually went and spoke to them before the meeting. I went and spoke to the most intimidating of them all, the architects and the managers who were holding everyone's feet to the fire about shipping process. And so I would go and speak to them personally. I'd even go and chat with them in their office, so that when it came to the meeting, they weren't surprised by what I had to say, and I also knew what the reaction would be beforehand. Mm-hmm. So I ended up building up a really good relationship with these people, and so I sat in a meeting and I sailed through the meetings, and everybody else was the one who's been caught out. And I must have seemed super competent, when actually all I'd done was not use my technical skills, but I used my social engagement rather than the technical skills. That's one thing I learned. The second thing is I then went to another company. When I left Microsoft, I went to work at Click, and Click had its own processes, very process-driven company. And it turned out I had a completely different set of processes. And again, I probably appeared far more competent than I actually was, just because I was now going into a different company and bringing a different set of values and a different set of attitudes, and which I practiced, of course. And therefore, I was able to change processes. And I remember meeting my manager, Kamal Hadi, my previous manager from Microsoft, some months afterwards. And he said, well, so how's things going at your Click and your new job? And I said, well, you wouldn't believe it, but I've completely transformed their bug reporting process, and I've completely transformed their shipping process. And he sat there thinking, who are you and what have you done with Donald? So I learned a lot from that first of all, you can do these things that you're really uncomfortable with, but you'll have to find a way of being comfortable with them. So in other words, it's not so much, I'm going to suggest it's not so much getting outside your comfort zone as taking the things that you find comfortable and bringing them with you into new zones, and bringing the skill set that you've developed.
That's a really powerful thought.
It works.
But it makes sense, and I think there's a lot. I'm trying to think about how that applies, because in this world, as you were saying, being data driven, there's so many assumptions, I think, that organizations make with what that means people will be able to do or comfortable doing. And I think the reality is, most of the people that they're talking about who need to be data driven are not, they're not analysts, right? They're people in marketing and operations and HR, and they're not necessarily even analytical.
Right. Yeah.
And it's not to say anything bad. It's just that
no,
that's the way they are, and that's not necessarily their skill set, right? Just like you're saying, and I think that that's going to pose some challenges that how do you get them to be comfortable, right? It's like, well, I'm in HR, and I can use some information, but now you want me to do all this detailed analysis, and
Right.
how
Yeah.
am I going to do that, and how can I be confident that I'm doing it right? And organizations are going to have to figure out maybe how to harness, like you're saying, how to harness each kind of skill set that somebody has in a different group and
And
help
the
apply it.
secret here is, what are your skills? What are the skills that I can bring to this situation? And yeah, sure, I do need to step up a little and improve my analytic skills if that's what it is. I had to step up and be more methodological than I like to be. Fair enough. I do need to do that, but I've also got skills that I can bring. And what are these skills I can bring? And that's what really helps you. You know, develop expand your comfort zone. It's not a question of getting outside your comfort zone. It's really a question of expanding your comfort zone. What am
Yeah.
I good at? What are the qualities that I'm comfortable with, and how do I bring it to this situation? And what's really good about that is that the other people you're then dealing with, they see another aspect of the work that is valuable as well. They'll start to
Yeah.
see that, oh yeah, we're very analytical, but we've missed some of the human element, we've missed some of the storytelling element, we've missed some of the social engagement that we really should be bringing to our work as well.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's something to kind of chew on. All right, so our final question here to close out our 30 minutes. So now I know you're not traveling a lot right now, like
Right.
nobody is, but I know you travel a lot. So imagine on your next trip, you decide that there's a carnival in town, and so you go and you visit a fortune teller, and they
Right.
ask you quite a surprising question, because you think they're going to ask you all these typical things. And they say, Donald, think about the most valuable skill you have when it comes to analytics. They're fortune tellers, so they know you're involved with
Hmm.
analytics. So if you could instill that one skill into everyone in the world, what would it be?
Wow. So yeah, that's just super interesting. I think one skill I have, and it's a skill in the sense that I've developed it deliberately, and I think that's important about skills. Skills aren't just inherent qualities that you have. You're not just a skillful footballer or skillful basketball player. They're not just inherently good. They've also practiced a lot to get there. So, skill that I've developed very deliberately, but I have a kind of, if you like, I have an inherent twist in my mind which helps me do this. But I've built it up as a kind of as a intellectual muscle, you like, is
Hmm.
the ability to sort of think about how I'm wrong, and the ability to think about a subject or a fact or a proposition from a completely different point of view and approach it completely orthogonally.
Wow.
When I was at university, one of my philosophy tutors, I'd said something that she'd said something, and I responded that I didn't think it was completely true. And in a very offhand, kind of joking remark, she said, "Well, any interesting proposition is always wrong in some way. The secret is just finding how it's wrong." And
Mm-hmm.
she meant it as a bit of a joke, but I actually kind of took it quite seriously, and I realized she's absolutely right. Um,
Yeah.
everything, but she's wrong in some ways. Um, any interesting proposition, you can dig into and find out what's actually wrong with this. And this isn't a negative perspective. What I mean is, you're always testing the edges of everything that you believe to be true. And the more you believe it to be true, the more you should test the edges of it. And there's a great book called by Paul Arden, I think, who's a marketing executive. A great book called "Whatever You Think the Opposite," which takes a very similar perspective. And he says, it's wrong to be right. And what he meant by that was, being right comes from a position of comfort. Being right comes from a position of experience. Being right comes from a position that says, of all the things I know, I'm therefore right. And that's a very boring place to be. It's much more interesting. It's wrong to be right. It's right to be wrong. take the risk of actually being wrong and incorrect, and exploring the edges, the inversions, the opposite of what you believe, and think, in what ways am I wrong? In what ways is this incorrect? And you find fascinating things there. But it's an exercise. It comes to me
Sure.
very naturally now, just because I have practiced it over many years. But it is an exercise. It does take some doing. But if more people could do that, then I think they would have a more interesting life themselves, and they would have much more sparkling conversations.
Yeah, I think I want to dig into that a little bit more about how to do that, but I definitely see that. First of all, in our world of analytics, it's a dangerous position potentially because it's that classic, you only know what you know at the moment,
Right.
right? Like you were saying, hey, this is what I've learned, this is my experience. But if you use that as your base, you don't give yourself the flexibility to think not necessarily even the opposite, but just differently
Yeah.
about a situation. So how did you do that? What were some of the things that you did to, like you said, build that skill and that intellectual muscle? Because it's really important. Like you said, it's not meant to be negative, it's meant to be actually productive.
Yeah, just challenge your ideas. First of all, what if the opposite was true? What would the world be like if the opposite was true? Is always a really interesting question. It's kind of inverting what you believe. I went to visit a few years ago. Went to visit the designer Don Norman, who wrote the Design of Everyday Things, and really well known designer. And I went to visit him in his office in San Diego, and on his whiteboard, his whiteboard was empty apart from one phrase, and it said, "The car is an accessory to the smartphone." And that's great. That's a great inversion of how we think about things. And I said, so what do you mean by that? And he said, well, how did you get here? Well, I landed at the airport. I came here by Uber. He said, so you came here by phone. Yeah. The phone was how I got to his office, not the car. The car just happened to be incidental. And that's inverting things that way can be really interesting, or taking things to extremes. The question that we questioned that when we were at Microsoft, thinking about Power BI, thinking about Power Pivot, thinking about self-service business intelligence. Who does business intelligence? Who does analytics? This small group of people. Well, what if everyone did it? What if every single person could do this? And when you're at Microsoft, you have to think in terms of, Excel is 500 million people, 600 million
Right.
users.
Scale.
What if they could do it? What if everyone could do that? That's a different. And what's very important is you don't necessarily find the answer in these challenges, but you find new ways of thinking that will then lead you to different answers. So, what if, how much should we charge for this software? $3,000 a desk, $500 a desk? What about if we charge nothing? Kind of the free software model. What if we paid people to use it? What would it need to look like? And this is what you do. You think, well, okay, I take these challenges to my thinking. And it doesn't mean that you find the answer there, but you find new ways of thinking. The type of software you design when you pay someone to use it is going to be very different from the type of software you design to, if you're charging $3,000 a desk. So that's not going to be the answer, but what do you learn from thinking through that problem? And what you learn can be really, really interesting and opens your mind to new perspectives in ways that you just couldn't. If your only question was, should this software be $1,000 a desk or $1,500 a desk, you're not going to learn anything new by answering that question. But if the question is, do we pay people to use it, or do we charge them 3,000, or maybe we charge them 20,000? Now you're open to new ways of thinking that you would never have got to by going over the kind of traditional track, if you like.
Yeah, I like that. When you first started talking about this idea, it reminded me of a different book by Edward de Bono, the Six Thinking Hats.
Right. Yeah.
Very similar, like to what you're saying, and everybody has it. It's not just the black hat in that book is the one that's supposed to kind of be a bit of the challenger, but there's five other hats, and you're supposed to give people on the team a different color hat, or you're supposed to try to put yourself in the position of a different hat to be able to do that. So it's almost like he gives you a bit of a formula
Yeah, exactly.
for
Yeah. I
like
did
how
that
to be
course.
that person and learn to do those things.
Yeah, many years ago, I did that course, and Edward de Bono kind of came in at the beginning of the course and at the end of the course and did
Oh,
seminars. It was fascinating.
I love that. I love that car thing. That's it's actually kind of blowing my mind still.
There you go, right?
I'm going to be thinking about that next time I get in my car and immediately plug my phone in and think,
I know
oh,
people now who buy their cars, based on whether it has connectivity for their phone or not.
yeah. It's, wow, that's a really good. We got to think. I got to think of how that works in our world. So, but I see we're right at the end here. So I want to be conscious of that. And there's so many things you said in this short time that I have to go back and reflect on. And I hope the folks who are joining us today and who join on the replay really take into consideration, because these are ideas that we can really use as our world is changing with data in a dramatic fashion, as we've seen over the last couple of months. But certainly, as we kind of move forward, it's gonna stick with us. So, Donald, thanks so much again. Really appreciate your time. It's great seeing you.
Great
And
pleasure.
one day you will give us the tour of your massive library. So
The library at the treehouse, yeah.
and the treehouse. Yeah, great. All right. So long.
Thank you very much.